we live matters. It's where God has placed us, and I think God can speak to us through the settings that we live in. I'm just on the outskirts of Colchester, and I think it's got something to share with us about life and faith. And I'd like to show you a few places around Colchester which will hopefully inspire us to think about our walk of faith. Just behind me is the last remains of a Roman temple that was dedicated to the god Mercury. But what's significant for me is the lines, the footprint that's left there of that temple point to a fact that people have always desired to worship that which is other. I wonder what other lessons we can find as we travel around Colchester and look at different locations. I wonder what you think of when you think of church. You might think of the people, the building. Well, we don't have any people at this church. We don't have much of a building, but this is the first evidence that we have of Christian worship in Colchester. That's what these stones bear witness to. The fact that faithful Christians many centuries ago felt compelled to meet together in public to worship Christ. This place doesn't look much. I've heard a hard drinker call it the magic roundabout, but it's the hill just above St Bottol's roundabout, and it's a special place for me. And actually it is a special place in the history books, because all we know is that there was a parish priest called Sir Jerick, and Sir Jerick had a church which was wooden built, wooden clad, and all we know is that the church was dedicated to St John. But the history book says that something heavenly happened there. It doesn't go into any other details, but there was a sense in the history books that something manifestly of God was present at that church in this location. And we know that because the order went out that St John's Monastery was to be built, and apparently there was great earthworks, and they levelled off this hillside to build the monastery, which is right here, and St Giles Church is just over that way. And the lesson for me is that God can be present, can be manifest right here in Essex, in Colchester. Remembering that when I lived in Portsmouth there was a railway bridge called Jacob's Ladder. It had a big cage over the top of it to stop any accidents, and over many years it had also suffered many acts of vandalism. It was a particularly tough, deprived area of Portsmouth, and I found out that this bridge was known as Jacob's Ladder. In the Bible, Jacob's Ladder is kind of like the gateway between earth and heaven, and it seemed such a strange nickname for the locals to give this really soulless, depressing part of Portsmouth. But actually, as I reflected as I walked over that bridge, maybe it was entirely appropriate, because the Christian God that I know has a heart for the poor and the deprived, and actually God maybe was in that place, there and available for the people. I wonder what your lunchtime routine is. Well, for the monks at St John's Monastery, they had a midday office where they would pray, and Beer Church, or church at the edge of the fields, was built by the monks so they could observe that midday office without having to walk all the way back to the monastery, and that is what gives this area its name. But it also gives us a lesson as I stand beside the Audley Chapel, the last bit of the structure where Audley House is, where we can worship. The reason for it being here, it reminds us, it inspires us to weave prayer into our everyday lives. Well, this beautiful bit of architecture is familiar to people in Colchester. It's the gatehouse of the St John's Monastery. It's all that's left of St John's Monastery, and as well as being a beautiful bit of architecture, it's also a sobering reminder of what can happen when a faith community becomes disconnected from the local people. The folks at St John's Monastery obviously were prayerful as they engaged in local commerce, as they made things. They grew prosperous, and for some reason felt it necessary to build battlements to defend their territory. The local people tore those battlements down. Apparently William Tyndale actually smuggled his translation, his English language translation of the Bible, into Colchester at these very docks on the Hythe. And we know that a man called John Pikes purchased one of Tyndale's copies of the English Bible for 4 shillings. We also understand that Tyndale smuggled the Bible in a bag of flour, and that was particularly appropriate because John Pikes was a baker. In 1850, as a 15-year-old, Charles Haddon Spurgeon walked up from the bottom of Hythe Hill on a snowy, blizzardy day and broke off his longer journey to come and shelter in this chapel. We know that on the 6th of January, that Sunday, a substitute preacher was up there, and he pointed to Spurgeon in pretty much this location here and challenged him to become a Christian, to cast his gaze upon God. Spurgeon became a Christian and then became an amazing prince of preachers who proclaimed the gospel to hundreds of thousands. This is the view he had. This is where it started. I know I keep on making this point about location, but the reason for making it is that God didn't just send a flash of light, didn't just send a messenger, but the message at Christmas is Emmanuel, God with us, God located on terra firma. God didn't just come as an image on a computer screen, but came in flesh and was born in a stable.